Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name is Laura and today I am finally getting to wrapping up my Buzzword Readathon. So I'm going to talk about all the books that I read for the Buzzword Readathon. I can't remember the dates. I think it was 3 weeks ago, but I will put it all down below. This was a readathon that was hosted by Dylan the Reader and Books and Lola. I believe it is the first of possibly many, and the idea is just sort of to take a word or a popular word and then read books that have that word in their title. So the first one took the word girl, and so I ended up reading books with the word girl in the title. I had planned to read more, but like I say in almost every video, I was busy, so I didn't read as much as I wanted to. I did only read manga for this challenge, but I will talk a little bit about each of the titles that I read and just give you kind of a little preview of some of the titles that I read for this readathon. I do have my window open, so if you hear any background noise, I really apologize, but it's just too warm to close the windows. The first title that I'm going to talk about is Mai the Psychic Girl by Kazuya Kudo and Ryoichi Ikegami. I read Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3, and Volume 4. This is one of the very first manga that was actually translated and published in English, and this is one of the very earliest publications by Viz. I think this one is from 1986, 1988, but it is the third printing. This is basically the story about this young girl here on the cover, and you can see her here with her father. Her name is Mai. She obviously has psychic powers. Her psychic powers are inherited powers from a long line through her mother. Her mother has since passed away, and so she is alone with her father. And this line that she is sort of belonging to is this, you know, ancient line of very kind of like sacred blood, and you know, it's associated with this ancient martial arts style and all of these such things. So basically this is starting with Mai as sort of a teenager. Her father has been away for a while and they've just been reunited, and her father really very much tries to keep her very protected, wants to keep her psychic powers under wraps. You know, she's not allowed to use her psychic powers because he is known, or he knows of, a world organization or an evil organization who wants to take her powers and then of course use them for destruction. I don't feel like there's a really clear defining mode or method or motive for this evil organization, but they are evil, and that's sort of what this is. This evil organization has somehow perfected some way to test children's psychic abilities, and so they have been testing children all over the world and have now narrowed down a handful of children who they believe have psychic powers. So they have discovered Mai because of course she exhibits very highly these psychic powers. So you do meet these other children along the way as this organization is after Mai and trying to track her down, and they take these other children and basically use them to fight against her. This is very much a plot-based story, despite the fact that the art in it is absolutely stunning, as you can see here. And despite the fact that it has a strong, or it has a central female protagonist, it is not a strong character story. Mai herself is very unformed. You don't have a lot of background. You don't really understand her personality, apart from the fact that she's quite whiny and very dependent on her father. Her father leaves the scene very early on. He goes missing, so he's basically gone for the entire story, and this is just a story basically of her being pursued. She does end up finding sort of comrades in a number of different people, but they themselves, again, are basically there just to move the story along. They're never given any backstory. You don't really know anything about them. They're just sort of attractive drawings on a page. So for me, I don't think that there's actually a lot besides story going on in here. There isn't a lot of depth to this character. There isn't really anything else kind of going on, but it is very visually beautiful, and It is still exciting to read, it's just that it is missing a component that I really, really like. And I remember I've read this before. I hadn't remembered the story very much, just a little bit, but I don't remember being so annoyed with the main character. I just found that she was really weak and whiny, and even at the end where she is sort of exhibiting her full psychic abilities, it's really just she's exhibiting psychic abilities. It's never like an expression of, you know, coming of age, or, you know, some sort of like empowerment, or like anything that you would normally kind of expect from this change in appearance. So it's fun. It was fun to read. It's beautiful to look at, but I didn't rate it as highly as I was expecting to. The next thing that I read is Volume 1 of Kyuko-chan, The Earth Invader Girl by Ueda Hajime. This is the same author as Furikuri, or Fulikuli, or FLCL, or whatever you want to call it. This basically reminded me a lot of Powerpuff Girls. It had a lot of the aesthetic, it had a lot of the kind of girl power type kind of messages in it, sort of. It kind of felt like a girl's version of a mecha type story. You're just sort of starting to get into what the story is, but basically you have sort of a sentient type robot who has crash landed, and is sort of fleeing from some other spaceship. I believe that this is sort of a created thing from some scientist in this kind of post-apocalyptic world, is now fleeing from some other spaceship, like trying not to be destroyed or captured. Can't quite remember because now it has been a couple of weeks, and invites a boy to basically pilot it and kind of escape from, or help her escape from, this evil spaceship. Later on, before the entire volume is over, a number of other kind of sentient type robots end up landing. They're all girl shapes. And they do end up being piloted by girls. And I believe that this actual main Kyuko-chan actually is supposed to be piloted by a girl. I think that that's sort of what is the eventual plan for this manga. At least that's what it feels like in Volume 1. But that being said, I didn't particularly care for it. I remember liking it better last time as well. This was actually kind of a week of reading. Basically for me. It just wasn't, it didn't stand up to kind of my memories of it. It wasn't as engaging as I'd hoped, and I was a little bit annoyed by just sort of the main male character who ends up kind of piloting this robot, which you can see here. And you can see that the art style is quite cutesy and quite simplified. Very much is why I think it reminds me of Powerpuff Girls a bit, and some of the flying sequences very much reminded me of Powerpuff Girls. Overall, I think it's weird. I don't know that I would recommend it. One of the robots is a very stereotypical depiction of a North American or indigenous person in North America, which is kind of hard to read right now these days. So it is kind of blatantly offensive in a way. You can see that character here. So there's just a couple of things that I didn't particularly care for it. I don't know if reading further if I would really get into this title, but I don't have any more. I don't plan on collecting anymore unless I see it somewhere for cheap, and I don't think I've seen this title in years, so I don't suspect that this is actually going to accumulate in my collection. But if it does, I would read more. The illustration style is really interesting, and maybe on a second read I might be into it again, and it definitely, because it does feel kind of like it's almost making fun of the mecha kind of genre, or kind of what the expectation of what girls in mecha would be like, or shoujo mecha might kind of be. It feels cheeky and quite almost satirical in a way, and so I might want to read a little bit more of this, but I didn't actually particularly like it. So it was an okay read. I'm glad I read it. It's been a long time. The next title that I read is The Girl Who Runs Through Time, original story by Yasutaka Tsutsui, and this manga is by Gaku Tsugano. I read volume 1 and volume 2. It is just a 2-volume manga, so it's nice and short. And last year I actually read the short novel that this is based off of, or the novella or short story or whatever it is. It's a pretty short book, probably less than 100 pages. So I'm not entirely sure how that classifies. But this pretty much follows that story, but not very well, and I found that really kind of disappointing. This was just a little bit too kind of silly and cutesy, where the story was a little more serious, a little bit more kind of melodramatic and terrifying even at times. This girl discovers, or all of a sudden is able to kind of jump through time. She is not always intentionally jumping through time, but it is happening, and she does get to the point where she is able to kind of affect the time herself. And through that she is able to kind of jump to times to make things change, to avoid accidents, and things like that. And then there's a pretty big twist sort of at the end, and it kind of is how all of it is explained. It's not explained until the very end, just like it is in the book, and it does sort of conclude really similarly. So if you've read the book, or the prose novel, whatever it is, I would say you probably don't need to read the manga. The manga does not add anything. The art style in it is pretty average, as you can see. There's nothing really special about it. And the story really, for me, it just doesn't add anything. It's not as exciting, it's not as dramatic. I wasn't really like worried about what was going on. I found sometimes I was just kind of confused. But I also felt like the characters really just made light of everything, and it was sort of like a really serious issue that was going on. So overall, I just didn't really care for this story. I might read it again though. Well, I will read it again though, because that's what I do, and maybe in the future I will like it more. It just tends to be like that. This was probably just a really off week for me. But it didn't live up to that novel, and personally I didn't really think that that novel was that great to begin with. I like sort of some of the feeling and sentimentality of it, but this certainly did not live up to the novel. And the novel wasn't, you know, I think the novel was like a 3-star read for me, so I just don't think that the artist had the grasp of what Tsutsui is able to do in his fiction. So it was okay. But definitely not my favorite. And then the last thing I read is Shularun, The Girl from the Other Side by Nagabe. I read volume 1, volume 2, and volume 3. So this is a title that I really do like, but I did find that volume 2 and volume 3 didn't hold up quite as well to volume 1. I think volume 1 is just so impactful and beautiful and atmospheric, and just sort of this sort of gentle pace in a very dark folktale-like environment, and I really, really loved everything about it. I love the art style, I love the characters in it, and I just sort of love the slow, quiet pace of it. Volume 2 and 3 adds more to the story, and so it does have some kind of loud moments, and maybe because I like so much the quietness of this story, I found it a little bit opposing to my taste. I have a good impression of the story still, so I am expecting really good things from it, and I am expecting it to improve, but volume 2 and 3 definitely were not as good as volume 1 in my opinion. This is basically the story about a young girl who has been discovered on the other side. She is not living kind of with the humans, she is living in this outskirts, and basically all the things, all of the beasts out in the outskirts are cursed things. If you are touched by one of these beasts, you also will catch this curse and transform into one of these beasts, and so she has been living on the outside. and she's actually been living with one of the beasts who has been very gentle with her and trying to kind of raise her and trying to reassure her. She's very young and she's kind of waiting for her auntie to come back and pick her up, and so he's constantly just sort of debating with himself, like, should I tell her that her auntie's probably never coming, or that, you know, her auntie's probably dead. He just wants to, like, really just protect this, like, very innocent small child. In volume 2, the child is taken back to the inside, and you learn some sort of insidious plots and insidious plans, and then of course there's some other things that progress, but I don't want to tell you too much about it because it's not very plot heavy. It is really very much about the setting, it is very much about the characters, and the characters are absolutely delightful. The setting is so wonderful, and the art in it is dark yet just incredibly beautiful and haunting and quiet, and it just has this very gentle feel to it, which I have said a few times. It just has this feeling to it when you read, and it's just incredibly sweet, and I love it, and it is really, really good, and I highly recommend it. It is unlike a lot of the manga that I have read in the past. Certainly if you are looking for a way to get into manga and you haven't read manga before, I think that this is a good entry into manga because it is so different, and it does very much have a folktale type feel to it. So I really enjoyed it. I was a little disappointed with it because Volume 1 was one of my top 10 titles of 2017, but I have very high hopes that it will end well, and I'm looking forward to reading more of this. So that is everything that I ended up reading for the Buzzword Readathon. I am expecting that I'm going to read a whole lot more for the Manga Readathon that my sister and I are hosting from June 17th to the 23rd. I will be linking that up down below. We do have giveaways and activities going on that week, so I hope you will join us and read manga with us all week. And anyway, I think that's all for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.